I walked into the house later than usual that Friday night, expecting nothing more than the usual routine. I'd grab a beer, slump onto the couch, and let the week's exhaustion fade into the background noise of some late-night show. But as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it. Something was off. Rachel, my wife of 7 years, was sitting at the kitchen table, her posture stiff, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She didn't look up when I walked in, which was strange. Normally, she'd greet me with a tired but warm smile, asking about my day. "Ethan," she finally said, her voice unnervingly calm, "we need to talk." The air between us felt heavier than usual, like something unspoken was already hovering in the room. I set my keys on the counter, trying to read her expression, but her face gave nothing away. "Sure," I said cautiously, sitting down across from her. "What's on your mind?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, she exhaled deeply, as if trying to gather the courage to say what was coming next. "I've been thinking a lot lately," she began, her tone measured, like she'd rehearsed this speech a dozen times. "About us. About what I need." I didn't like where this was going. "Okay," I said slowly, bracing myself. "And what is it that you need?" Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of hesitation before she spoke. "I need space," she said carefully. "I need to explore something outside of this marriage." I blinked, not sure I'd heard her correctly. "Space," I repeated. "What the hell does that mean?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "I'm not saying I want to leave you. There's someone I've connected with, and I feel like I need to see where it goes." The words hit me like a brick to the chest. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice sharp. "You're telling me you want to date someone else? While we're still married?" Her face softened, like she was trying to make this sound reasonable. "It's not about you, Ethan. It's about me. I feel like I've been stuck, like I've lost a part of myself. And this might help me figure things out." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. "And who is this person?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Her hesitation was all the answer I needed. "His name is Matt," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "We work together. It hasn't gone beyond talking, but there's a connection." I let out a bitter laugh, though there was nothing funny about this. "A connection," I said, shaking my head. "So what? You want my permission to screw around with your coworker and pretend it won't destroy everything we've built?" "That's not fair," she snapped, her composure breaking for the first time. "This isn't just about sex, Ethan. It's about me figuring out what I want, what I need." "And what about what I need?" I shot back, my voice rising. "Did that ever cross your mind? Or were you too busy fantasizing about Matt to give a damn?" Her face fell, and for a moment, she looked genuinely hurt. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said quietly, "but I can't keep ignoring how I feel." I stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You've got some nerve, Rachel," I said, my anger boiling over. "You don't get to just throw this at me and expect me to be okay with it." "I'm not asking for your approval," she said, standing up to face me. "I'm just being honest about where I am right now." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You're officially the most selfish person I've ever met." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the guest room, slamming the door behind me. My chest felt tight, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts I couldn't sort through. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she come home smiling, pretending everything was fine, while she planned this betrayal? I spent the night tossing and turning, unable to shut off the replay of her words in my head. "I feel like I've lost a part of myself." What did that even mean? Was I supposed to feel sorry for her? Was I supposed to just accept that the woman I'd built a life with wanted to try someone else on for size? By the time morning came, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to be some passive bystander in this disaster. If Rachel wanted to blow up our marriage, I wasn't going to make it easy for her. The morning after Rachel's confession, I woke up feeling like I'd barely slept. My head was pounding, and my chest felt heavy. I couldn't shake the memory of her words or the hollow look in her eyes when she admitted everything. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. If she thought I'd sit back and let her destroy our marriage without a fight, she was dead wrong. Rachel wasn't in the kitchen when I went downstairs. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the fridge. I made a cup of coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I poured it, and sat at the table, staring at the empty seat across from me. That used to be her spot. She'd sit there every morning, scrolling through her phone, half listening while I talked about work. How many mornings had she been texting Matt instead of paying attention to me? The thought made my stomach turn. I couldn't stay in the house, not with her things scattered everywhere, reminders of the life I thought we were building. So, I grabbed my keys and left. I didn't even know where I was going. I just needed to get out, to clear my head. I ended up at a park a few miles from home. It was quiet, the kind of place where people want to walk their dogs or jog in the early morning. I found a bench near the edge of the pond and sat down, staring at the rippling water. My thoughts kept circling back to the same question. How had I missed the signs? Was I really so oblivious that I hadn't noticed my own wife slipping away? I stayed there for hours, long enough for the coffee in my travel mug to go cold. Eventually, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Rachel. Her name on the screen sent a wave of anger through me, but I answered anyway. "Where are you?" she asked, her voice soft but cautious. "Out," I said flatly. "Ethan," she began, but I cut her off. "Don't," I snapped. "I can't do this right now, Rachel. I can't listen to you try to justify what you've done. Just give me space." There was a long pause on the other end. "Okay," she said quietly, "but we need to talk at some point." "Yeah," I muttered before hanging up. When I got back to the house later that afternoon, she was sitting on the couch, looking like she'd been crying. Her eyes were red, and she kept twisting the hem of her sweater in her hands. She didn't say anything as I walked past her into the kitchen. I opened the fridge, grabbed a beer, and leaned against the counter, watching her from a distance. She finally looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and determination. "I know you're angry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Angry?" I repeated, my tone sharp. "Rachel, angry doesn't even begin to cover it." She flinched but didn't look away. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Ethan. I'm trying to figure out who I am. I feel like I've been lost for so long. And your solution to that is to shack up with Matt?" I snapped. "That's how you find yourself?" "It's not about him," she insisted, her voice cracking. "It's about me. I need to understand what I want, what makes me happy. And I guess I don't make you happy anymore," I said bitterly. Her silence told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head, laughing humorlessly. "You know what? Fine. If that's what you need to do, go ahead. But don't expect me to sit here and wait for you to figure it out." "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm saying I'm done, Rachel," I said, my voice firm. "You want space? You've got it. But don't think for a second that I'll be here when you decide you're ready to come back." Her face crumpled, and tears started streaming down her cheeks. "Ethan, please. Don't say that. We can work through this." "Work through what?" I shot back. "You've already checked out of this marriage. You're just too much of a coward to admit it." She didn't respond, just buried her face in her hands. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. The sight of her, the sound of her crying, it was too much. So, I left. I drove aimlessly for hours, the streets blurring together as I tried to make sense of everything. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I loved turned into someone I barely recognized? And why did it still hurt so much, even after everything she'd done? Eventually, I ended up at a bar on the edge of town. It was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of place where people went to drink away their problems. I sat at the counter and ordered a whiskey, downing it in one go before ordering another. I didn't care about the burn in my throat or the ache in my chest. I just needed something to numb the pain. By the time I got home, it was late. The house was dark, and Rachel was already in bed. I stood outside the door to our bedroom for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, but I couldn't bring myself to go in. Instead, I went to the guest room and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling until sleep finally took over. In the morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a renewed sense of determination. If Rachel wanted to blow up our marriage, I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. It was time to take control of the situation. I wasn't sure what that meant yet, but one thing was clear. This was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up in the guest room feeling groggy and disoriented. For a moment, I forgot where I was, but then everything came rushing back. Rachel, her confession, the argument, the mess that was now my life. The ache in my chest was sharp and unrelenting, but I couldn't let myself wallow in it. If I gave in to the pain now, it would swallow me whole. I went downstairs, half hoping she wouldn't be there, but Rachel was sitting at the dining table with a mug of coffee. She glanced up when she heard me and opened her mouth like she was about to say something, but I walked past her to the kitchen. I poured myself a cup, not bothering to acknowledge her. "Ethan," she finally said, her voice hesitant, "can we talk?" I leaned against the counter, not looking at her. "I don't think there's anything left to say." "Please," she said quietly. "I don't want things to be like this." I turned to face her, my anger simmering just below the surface. "What exactly do you want, Rachel? Do you want me to tell you it's okay? That I understand? Because I don't. I don't understand how you could do this to me, to us." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I'm not asking for that. I don't want to lose you." "You should have thought about that before you decided Matt was worth risking everything for," I snapped. She flinched but didn't look away. "I told you, it's not about him. It's about me. And yet, he's the one you chose to figure yourself out with," I said bitterly. "Do you even realize how selfish that is?" "I know it's selfish," she admitted, her voice breaking, "but I didn't know what else to do. I feel like I've been drowning, Ethan. Like I've been losing myself little by little, and I didn't know how to tell you. So instead of talking to me, you ran to someone else," I said, my tone cutting. "You didn't even give me a chance, Rachel." Her tears spilled over, and she wiped them away with the sleeve of her sweater. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you, but I don't know how to fix this." I stared at her, my chest tightening with a mix of anger and sadness. "Maybe you can't," I said finally. "Maybe some things can't be fixed." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. She looked like she wanted to argue, to fight for something, but she didn't. Instead, she just nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. The rest of the day passed in a tense silence. I stayed out of her way, retreating to the guest room to sort through my thoughts. Every time I tried to focus on something else, work emails, the book on my nightstand, my mind drifted back to her, to us, to the years we'd spent building a life together. How had it all come to this? By evening, I knew I couldn't stay in the house much longer. Being around Rachel, seeing her every time I walked into her room, it was too much. I needed space, time to think without her presence constantly reminding me of what I'd lost. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell her where I was going, and she didn't ask. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but she didn't try to stop me. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Part of me wanted to believe that leaving would make things easier, but another part knew that the hardest part was still ahead. I ended up at Mike's place, my best friend since college. He took one look at me and didn't ask any questions, just handed me a beer and told me to sit down. It was a relief not to have to explain myself right away, to just exist in someone else's space without the weight of expectations or judgment. After a while, Mike finally spoke. "You look like shit, man," he said, his tone light but concerned. "Thanks," I muttered, taking a swig of my beer. "You gonna tell me what's going on, or am I supposed to guess?" he asked. I sighed, leaning back on the couch. "Rachel wants to explore her feelings with someone else," I said bitterly. "Apparently, our marriage isn't enough for her anymore." Mike let out a low whistle. "Damn. I'm sorry, man. That's rough." "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "She says it's not about me, but how the hell am I supposed to believe that? If I was enough, she wouldn't need someone else." Mike didn't say anything for a moment, just stared at the TV, where some old basketball game was playing. Finally, he looked at me. "You know this isn't on you, right?" I let out a humorless laugh. "Doesn't feel that way." "It's not," he said firmly. "She made her choices, Ethan. You didn't force her into anything. His words were comforting, but they didn't erase the ache in my chest. I stayed at Mike's for a few days, trying to sort through my emotions. During the day, I kept myself busy, going to the gym, helping Mike with yard work, anything to keep my mind from wandering. But at night, when the house was quiet, the doubts crept back in. Was I really ready to walk away from my marriage? Or was there still something worth fighting for? On the third day, I got a text from Rachel. It was short and to the point. We need to talk. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I wasn't sure what she wanted to say, but I knew I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. Instead of responding, I put my phone down and went for a run. The cool evening air stung my lungs, but it felt good to push my body, to channel my frustration into something physical. By the time I got back to Mike's, my mind was clearer. I still didn't know what my next step would be, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let Rachel dictate the rest of my life. If she wanted to figure herself out, fine. But I wasn't going to let her take me down with her. When I finally went back to the house, I felt a strange sense of detachment. The place that had once felt like home now felt foreign, as though I didn't quite belong there anymore. Rachel's car was in the driveway, and my stomach tightened as I stepped inside. She was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a blanket draped over her shoulders. She looked up when she heard me, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "You're back," she said softly, standing up. "Yeah," I replied, my voice neutral. I closed the door behind me and set my bag down near the stairs. There was a long, awkward silence. Rachel shifted her weight, as if she wasn't sure whether to approach me or keep her distance. Finally, she spoke. "Can we talk? Please." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Fine," I said, moving to the kitchen. I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the counter as she followed me, her movements hesitant. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her hands wringing together. "About everything. About us." "And?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched but pushed forward. "I know I've hurt you, Ethan. I know what I did was selfish, and I can't take it back. But I want to try to make things right. I want to fix this." I stared at her, my chest tight with a mix of anger and sadness. "Fix this?" I repeated. "You think you can just wave a magic wand and undo all of this? Rachel, you betrayed me. You lied to me. How am I supposed to move past that?" "I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight," she said quickly. "I know it's going to take time, but I still love you, Ethan. I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have turned to someone else instead of coming to me. Do you even understand how much you've broken my trust?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer. "I do," she said, her voice trembling. "And I hate myself for it. I've been so lost, Ethan. I didn't know how to talk to you, how to tell you what I was feeling. And then Matt, he was just there." "Matt?" I said, the name leaving a sour taste in my mouth. "So what? You're done with him now? Is that supposed to make this better?" "It wasn't real," she insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "It was a stupid mistake. He doesn't mean anything to me." "Well, he sure meant something last week when you packed your bag and spent the weekend with him," I snapped. "Don't stand here and try to downplay it, Rachel. You made your choice. You chose him." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't choose him," she said. "I made a mistake, but I never stopped choosing you. I was scared, Ethan. I felt like I was losing myself, and I didn't know how to handle it. And you thought sleeping with another man was the solution?" I asked, my voice rising. "Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds?" She didn't respond, just looked at me with pleading eyes, as if she expected me to offer some kind of reassurance. But I couldn't. I was too angry, too hurt. The woman standing in front of me felt like a stranger, someone I no longer recognized. "I can't do this right now," I said, setting the glass down with a sharp clink. "I need space." "Ethan, please," she said, stepping closer. "Don't shut me out. We can fix this. I know we can." "Not tonight," I said firmly. "I need to think." I left the kitchen without another word, heading up to the guest room and shutting the door behind me. My head was pounding, and my chest felt heavy with emotions I couldn't untangle. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of everything. Rachel's words replayed in my mind, over and over. I never stopped choosing you. I want to fix this. A part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to cling to the hope that we could somehow salvage what was left of our marriage. But another part of me, the part that had been crushed by her betrayal, wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. The next morning, I woke up feeling no closer to an answer. Rachel was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, looking exhausted. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she barely looked at me as I poured myself a cup of coffee. "I'm going to stay at Mike's for a while," I said, breaking the silence. Her head shot up, panic flashing across her face. "Ethan, no," she said. "Please don't go. We can work through this." "I need space, Rachel," I said firmly. "I can't think straight when I'm here, and right now, I don't know what I want. Staying here isn't helping." Her shoulders slumped, and she looked down at her hands. "How long will you be gone?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just need time." She didn't argue, didn't try to stop me. She simply nodded, her face pale and defeated. I packed a bag and left without looking back, my chest heavy with a mix of relief and guilt. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of this, but I knew one thing for certain. Things couldn't go back to the way they were. At Mike's house, things felt simple. He didn't pry or push me to talk unless I was ready, and I appreciated that. Most days, I kept busy with small tasks to distract myself. I helped him fix his fence, reorganized his garage, and even cooked dinner a couple of times, things I never had the energy for at home. But no matter how occupied I stayed, the questions and doubts always crept in when the house got quiet. Rachel texted me a few times over the first week, but I didn't respond. Her messages ranged from heartfelt apologies to desperate pleas for me to come back. I read each one, feeling the weight of her words, but I couldn't bring myself to reply. What was there to say? I didn't know how to move forward, or if I even wanted to. One night, as Mike and I sat in the backyard with beers in hand, he finally broke the silence. "So," he said carefully, "what's your plan?" I stared at the fire pit, watching the flames flicker and dance. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to work things out, but the other part, I don't think I can ever look at her the same way again." Mike nodded, taking a sip of his beer. "It's a tough spot, man. But whatever you decide, make sure you're doing it for you, not just to make her feel better." His words stuck with me. For so long, I'd been bending over backward to keep Rachel happy, convincing myself that her happiness was enough to sustain us both. But where had that gotten me? Left picking up the pieces of a marriage she had shattered without a second thought. The next day, I went for a long drive, hoping the open road would help me clear my head. I ended up in a small town about an hour away, where I stumbled upon a quiet coffee shop tucked into the corner of a brick-lined street. The place was cozy, with mismatched chairs and soft jazz playing in the background. I ordered a coffee and found a seat near the window, letting myself sink into the peaceful atmosphere. As I sat there, I found myself reflecting on the last few years of my life with Rachel. There had been good times, sure, but looking back, I realized just how often I'd been the one making sacrifices, the one putting in the effort to keep us afloat. Rachel had always been restless, always searching for something more, and I had spent so much time trying to fill that void for her. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. And now, I had to ask myself, did I really want to spend the rest of my life trying to meet someone else's unending expectations? When I got back to Mike's, I felt a little lighter, as if a small part of the weight I'd been carrying had lifted. I still didn't have all the answers, but I was starting to understand what I needed to do. A few days later, Rachel called me. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before finally answering. "Hi," she said softly. Her voice sounded tired, like she hadn't been sleeping much. "Hi," I replied, my tone neutral. There was a pause, and then she asked, "Can we talk?" "Please." I hesitated, but eventually agreed. "Okay, tomorrow." The next afternoon, I met Rachel at a park halfway between Mike's house and ours. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench beneath a sprawling oak tree. When she saw me, she stood, smoothing her hands over her jeans nervously. "Thanks for coming," she said as I approached. I nodded, not sure what to say. We sat down, the tension between us thick and uncomfortable. For a while, neither of us spoke, the sounds of children playing in the distance filling the silence. Finally, Rachel broke the quiet. "Ethan, I've spent the last 2 weeks thinking about everything about us, about what I've done. And I know I don't deserve another chance, but I need you to know how sorry I am." Her voice trembled, and she looked at me with tear-filled eyes. "I messed up. I let my insecurities and my fears get the best of me, and I hurt you in the worst way possible. If I could take it back, I would. But all I can do now is tell you how much I regret it." I stared at the ground, her words washing over me. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could somehow rebuild what was broken. But another part of me, the part that had been carrying the pain of her betrayal, couldn't let go of the anger and hurt. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally, my voice steady. "But I don't think it changes anything." Rachel's face crumpled, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Ethan, please," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I want to fix this." I shook my head, my chest tightening. "I loved you, Rachel. I loved you with everything I had. But you broke something between us, and I don't know if it can ever be fixed. I can't keep giving you pieces of myself just to keep us together." Her tears fell freely now, and I felt a pang of guilt, but I knew I had to stay firm. For years, I'd been putting her needs above my own, and where had that gotten me? Miserable and broken. "I need to move on," I said quietly, "and I think you do too." Rachel looked at me, her expression a mix of heartbreak and resignation. "So, this is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Yeah, this is it." We sat in silence for a long time after that, the weight of finality settling between us. When we finally stood, Rachel hesitated before walking away, as if she was waiting for me to call her back. But I didn't. I watched as she disappeared down the path, and when she was out of sight, I turned and walked in the opposite direction. As I drove back to Mike's, I felt an odd sense of relief. It wasn't the kind of happy, triumphant feeling I'd hoped for. It was quieter, more subdued. But it was there. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my life. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let Rachel, or anyone else, define me anymore. The days after I told Rachel it was over felt surreal. It wasn't like the movies, where the weight lifts instantly, leaving you free and clear. No, this was messier, quieter, but still chaotic. My mind swung between relief and regret, anger and sadness. I'd stare at my phone some nights, half expecting her to call or text, but she didn't. I guess she finally understood it was done. I moved back into the house soon after. It was strange walking through the front door, knowing it was mine alone now. Rachel had already picked up the last of her things, leaving behind only the bare essentials. The silence in the house felt heavier than before, but this time, it didn't bother me as much. I took my time settling back in, rearranging the furniture, getting rid of reminders of what we used to be. It wasn't just about cleaning the space, it was about reclaiming it. I focused on rebuilding my routine. Work became an anchor, and I threw myself into it like never before. My boss noticed, even joked about giving me a raise for all the extra effort. But it wasn't about the money. I just needed something to keep me grounded. Even so, the ache of what had happened lingered, creeping up on me in quiet moments when I let my guard down. One evening, a couple of weeks later, Mike convinced me to join him for drinks. I wasn't in the mood, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. "You need to get out, man," he said. "Sitting in that house all the time isn't doing you any good." We ended up at a bar downtown, the kind of place I wouldn't have chosen on my own. It was louder than I liked, filled with people who looked younger and freer than I felt. I nursed a beer at the edge of the crowd, letting Mike do the socializing. But then, as I glanced around the room, my eyes landed on someone I didn't expect to see. Lauren. We hadn't spoken in years. She was an old friend from college, someone I'd lost touch with when life got busy. She was standing near the bar, talking to a small group of people, her laughter carrying over the noise. She looked the same, warm, approachable, real. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of something I couldn't quite name. She noticed me a moment later, her eyes lighting up in recognition. "Ethan," she said, weaving through the crowd toward me. "Lauren," I said, smiling despite myself. "Wow, it's been, what, 10 years?" "Something like that," she replied, her grin wide. "What are you doing here?" "Mike dragged me out," I said, gesturing toward my friend, who was deep in conversation across the room. "He said I needed a change of scenery." She laughed. "Good call. It's nice to see you." We fell into easy conversation, catching up on everything we'd missed. She told me about her career, her recent move back to the city, and the adventures she'd had along the way. I told her about work, about Mike, and cautiously about the divorce. She didn't pry or ask for details, just listened with genuine empathy. By the end of the night, I felt lighter than I had in months. When she suggested grabbing coffee sometime, I didn't hesitate. "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. Over the next few weeks, we started seeing each other more often. Coffee turned into lunch, then dinner, then late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. Lauren wasn't like Rachel. She didn't play games, didn't make me feel like I had to prove myself. With her, everything felt easy, natural. At first, I was cautious, afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past. But Lauren never pushed. She gave me space when I needed it, let me take things at my own pace. Slowly but surely, I started to let my guard down. I told her about the parts of my life I hadn't shared with anyone else, and she did the same. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. One evening, as we sat on her couch watching a movie, she turned to me and said, "You seem different." "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter," she said, studying me. "Happier." I thought about it for a moment and realized she was right. The bitterness I'd carried for so long had started to fade. The house didn't feel like a tomb anymore. My thoughts weren't consumed by Rachel and everything she'd done. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was looking forward instead of back. "Yeah," I said with a small smile. "I think I am." Life didn't magically fall into place after that, but it kept moving forward. There were still hard days, moments when the past crept up and reminded me of what I'd lost. But those moments didn't define me anymore. I'd learned to let go, to stop carrying the weight of Rachel's betrayal like it was my burden to bear. As for Rachel, I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved to a different city, started fresh. Part of me hoped she'd found what she was looking for, though I doubted it. She'd been chasing something undefined for so long, and I wasn't sure she'd ever stop. But that wasn't my concern anymore. She was her own person, and I was mine. One evening, as Lauren and I sat outside watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized how far I'd come. I didn't know where life would take us, or if this new chapter would last forever. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I wasn't clinging to the past or letting it hold me back. "I'm glad I ran into you that night," I said, glancing at her. She smiled, her hand brushing against mine. "Me too." And just like that, the future didn't feel so scary anymore. It felt like a beginning, a real one I was finally ready for.